In a galaxy as vast as that of Star Wars, it really isn't a surprise that dark, unsettling things lurked in the deeper corners of the world. We've covered some of these less amicable beings in the past, such as the murderous Charons who wanted to cleanse all life from the universe. Like any good fantasy series, Star Wars has its fair share of creepy monsters, and today we'll be looking at one of them, the Anzati. We're sure some of you have heard about them before, as they're fairly well known among tabletop gamers, role players, and comics fans, but for those of you who've never heard of them, you're in for a treat.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Now, at first glance, the Anzati didn't look like anything special. They were a species of Force-sensitive near-humans. They had greyish or brown skin and were a little smaller than the average human, standing at an average of 1.6 meters tall and weighing around 60 kilograms. Scientists had very little chance to study an Anzat person, but from the few medical records that were found on this species, it became clear their biology was bizarre. The Anzati had no pulse, no way of generating or maintaining body temperature, and by all accounts, they shouldn't have been alive at all. We're only amateur xenobiologists, but if we had to guess, we'd attribute these biological anomalies to their diet, and connected to that, their only real outlandish biological feature, their face feelers. These slurpers, usually known as tentacles to beings of culture, were twin probosces that protruded out of an Anzat's face, one out of each cheek. As they extended out of little slits by their noses, these slurpers uncurled, long and thin, and the perfect size to extend up another sentient's nose. Because an Anzat's favorite food was none other than brain, fresh and warm from inside of your noggin. They had several names for their preferred food, including soup, luck, and sea of memory, none of which make us feel any better about the whole affair. When the Anzati fed on another being's brain, they didn't just eat the organ itself. No. They went the extra mile to feed on the living force within that being, leading to their fan-given nickname of Force Vampires. That's why the Anzati preferred feeding on Jedi and other Force sensitives. And who can blame them? We've also been guilty of buying the extra large meal. As you'd expect for any creature that thought force-speeding Jedi and Sith were the definition of fast food, the Anzati were disgustingly OP. On a physical level, they were blessed with super speed, super strength, super agility, super reflexes, super healing, you name it. They were simply beyond human, which made hunting humans easier. But their physical strengths were just the tip of the iceberg. The Anzati had a lot more gifts to make hunting top-tier prey easier. They were born with powerful telepathic abilities that would only grow stronger the more they aged, and to an Anzat, that was basically an infinite power glitch. Since they hunted Force sensitives, they had sensory organs unique to their species that allowed them to sense others' presence in the Force. Force sensitives like Jedi did so using their connection to the Force, but the Anzati had a built-in organ for it. Their nose-probing, brain-draining tentacles were connected to this same organ. The way they hunted has been described as grotesque, and we're not sure if we're creeped out, fascinated, or both. Once an Anzat had tracked down a meal, they would use their telepathic abilities to hypnotize their victim. Jedi who endured this compared their hypnosis to a sort of mind trick. Once enchanted, the Anzat would lure their victim closer. The closer their victim got, the stronger their telepathic control over them. And once they were cradled in the Anzat's loving embrace, those thin tentacles would gracefully uncurl out of their cheek pouches, twitching in the air as they reached for the victim's face. They caressed their cheeks until they found their way to the nostrils, which they crawled up, pushing through to the brain cavity, where they would slurp their prize up like a Capri Sun from hell. While they slurped up the brain, they also sucked up their victim's soup, which was often in the same cavity, but sometimes not, depending on their victim's species. This feeding method led to the in-universe nickname of snot vampires, which is a very amusing way to describe something truly abominable. In theory, a person could fight against this attack, but usually, by the time they got to the brain-sucking stage, it was too late. Much like the vampires Anne Rice imagined, which we can't help but feel were influences for the Anzati, their attacks were almost always perfectly executed to sap the victim's will to fight away. To add to the creepy factor, the Anzat would sometimes hold their victims' heads, which could look like a tender moment if viewed from afar. There are also rumors that some Anzati kept their victims alive and fed off them multiple times, savoring their meals before the end. An interesting debate arises when considering what the Anzati really fed on. They called it soup or luck, but in truth, there's no real consensus as to what they were eating. One interpretation was the gel-like mucus substance that sustained life or luck. Life essence and luck, or fate, were directly linked to the force, but what the Anzati ate were only vaguely related. The interpretation found in the Anzati's legends was that soup was the essence of a person, a substance that encapsulated their presence and being. The more presence the victim had, the bigger meal it would be. It seems that what the Anzati fed off was what we consider the abstract concept of self. It wasn't just life force, but what made someone them, their core. That's why, although they loved eating victims strong in the force, it wasn't their powerful connection that they fed off. Rather, being strong in the force tended to have strong senses of self. The fact that they loved eating force users was correlation, not causation. Not that the Anzati cared. They were so ancient that even the concept of the force seemed like just another new age fad that would die away. Because, did we mention? The Anzati weren't just preternaturally strong, they were also pretty much immortal. They could live hundreds of years, even millennia. To sustain themselves, they didn't even need to feed all that often. They could eat a dozen or so average beings a day, but more substantial individuals meant that they needed to eat less. While it was technically possible for them to starve to death, it wasn't something that was likely to happen. Back to us comparing them to modern vampires, Anzati were obsessed with feeding. Their entire culture revolved around soup and how to get it. Once they set out to hunt, their hunger consumed their every conscious thought. To an Anzat, other people were nothing more than a potential meal, there only to be eaten at their pleasure. The older they got, the greater their hunger became, which, in turn, meant that the older an Anzati got, the more insane they would become. As the hunger took them over, there was less and less room for critical thought. That's how most Anzati ended up dying. In a fit of hunger-driven insanity, they would miscalculate and end up dead at the hands of their victims or the community they were hiding in. As was common with other ancient species, Anzati didn't reproduce frequently. When they did, they didn't even name their spawn. They allowed them to pick their own name. When young Anzati reached a century old, they were considered adults and would leave their community in search of soup. If you've ever read Anne Rice, you'll know her vampires are merciless predators, but also incredibly passionate about art. Much like them, the Anzati were also known to be patrons of the fine arts, such as poetry, literature, music. Not only did they appreciate others' creations, but they also produced their own. With their centuries of life, that gave them more than enough time to perfect one craft, then move to another. That's what made the pursuit pointless. Many thought the Anzati were brilliant scholars or artisans, but the truth was that they never bothered mastering any trade other than the art of feeding. It would have been trivial, therefore not worth doing. Taste in art aside, the Anzati did like any good vampire knows to do and blended in. They kept low profiles, hunting in swift secrecy, and did what they could to be overlooked. That way, they lived among their herd of prey, feeding at their discretion without ever arousing suspicion. These skills are what made them excellent assassins, but at the same time, it's also what kept them as vague legends and stories in most civilizations' memories, nothing more than the boogeyman you tell your child about before they go to sleep. For a long time, no one knew where their homeworld was, and the galaxy was a happier place for it. Some stories put it in the mid-rim around the Polemian trade route, but there was no proof for the simple reason that anyone who went to where the planet was suspected to be vanished without a trace. Some lucky folk lived to tell the tales of creepy predators that almost sucked their souls dry, and that's where most stories of the Anzati came from. According to these folk tales, the Anzati roamed the galaxy, feeding on people and returning to their homeworld to mate and train. They were allegedly some of the first people to venture into space, and they made early contact with the ancient Sith. According to these stories, that's where Korriban blood soup comes from. As a whole, they did their best to remain unseen, but over the millennia of galactic history, there were some notable exceptions. The first was Jedi Knight Volfi Karko. We don't think we need to tell you why the idea of an Anzat Jedi is beyond wild, but Karko did it. Raised in the temple from infancy, he did a good job, which surprised everyone involved. Anzati were considered too violent to uphold the tenets of the Jedi. In the end, Karko proved them right in a twisted way. Ever since he was young, he was trained with extreme discipline in mind to control his urges. For a long time, he did well. So well, in fact, that he grew arrogant, believing himself above his entire species' natural urges. Arrogance led to failure, and Karko gave in to his hunger, feeding on soup for the very first time. Succumbing to his hunger pushed him to fall to the dark side. The Jedi chose to imprison him in a stasis field on the prison world of Kifex for 1,000 years. However, instead of contemplating the error of his ways, Karko used this time to amass followers among other Anzati on the planet before eventually being killed by Quinlan Vos. But Karko wasn't the only fallen Anzat Jedi. Nikos Tyrus was another. He trained as one of Count Dooku's dark acolytes. The most famous Anzati, however, were assassins or bounty hunters. Sage, Tasha, Ruth Kelko, and Akusai were 3 assassins active during the Clone Wars on Seleucami. Around 0 BBY, Danik Jericho, a bounty hunter, was known as the Eater of Luck. No matter the age or occupation, the Anzati were bad news for anyone who knew them. But that raises the question, is it better to know a predator is out there and that you can do nothing to stop them, or better to live in ignorance and hope they never cross your path? But that concludes our take on the Anzati, a species either beloved or hated by fans. What do you think? Would you consider them evil because of their natural appetites and urges, or simply misunderstood? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.